So for these weekly messages, as I've been inviting different people to come and join me as part of a conversation, it's usually because either it's someone I know and feel that they've got something particularly to say, or in addition to that, somebody who is very much going to be talking about a topic that is in the news at the moment. And that's certainly the case this week, as I'm joined by Carolyn Lewis, who is the Diocese Director of Education, and we're going to be talking about schools. So thank you, Carolyn, ever so much for coming to join me for this week's message. And before we get into any of the details of talking about schools, can I just ask you how you are and how your family are coping in the current circumstances?
Thanks, Bishop Martyn. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. It's been really interesting. It's been interesting, particularly for me, in two strands. Clearly, professionally, there's been a great deal of activity. And of course, like many of my colleagues at St Martin's House, we are not working there. We're all working from home. And of course, I've got two children of different ages who have also been very affected by the changes in the education system at the moment. So I've got a child at primary school who's home, and my elder son is abruptly back from university in his first year. So really kind of feeling at both ends the kind of topsy-turvy world that we're all in with COVID-19.
Thank you. And as you talk about your professional life in particular, mindful that you are helping to support some 97 church schools all across Leicester and Leicestershire. And in the last week or two, there's been quite a bit of loose language that's been used about schools reopening, whereas, of course, the reality is that most of them have been open the whole time. But I'm just wondering, give us a bit of a flavour of what you think life at school has been like over these last few weeks.
With just 2 days' notice, our school leaders essentially had to entirely repurpose their school provision. And yes, they didn't close. They remain open, and they were supporting children of key workers and also our vulnerable children. Many schools had to quickly engage with online platforms and to support children and their families to engage with those online platforms. And of course, there's a great assumption there that all children and young people have access. And indeed, something that was really apparent just in our household was, we have broadband and we have equipment. I'm here working and talking to you now. But we have one of those things, and parents struggling with having to work at home at the same time as trying to support children with their learning. So our schools were trying as well to support parents and not add to the anxiety and stress and strain. It's been an enormous task by our school leaders and school teachers and governors, and I'm daily inspired and encouraged by their commitment and energy to do this and do it well. And they've really stepped up and done something quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I'd want to join you in that, in saying just what a debt of gratitude we owe to school teachers and staff generally over these last few weeks. It has been really quite extraordinary the way they've adapted and changed the whole way that they operate. I'm also conscious now, though, that the debate has got very heated about how we extend school life now to include more children. And the government obviously is having to try and balance different needs between the needs of the children themselves, those of teachers, parents, wider society, and so on. It's an extraordinarily difficult decision that has to be made. I'm wondering, for you as Director of Education, what's your role in all of this? And what's your sense of the sort of pressures that school leaders are under at the moment?
Well, I'm very clear what my role is in terms of supporting our church schools to be distinctively Christian communities. And I'm not the local authority. I'm not the Regional Schools Commissioner. And so that puts me in a really privileged position to be able to support school leaders and governors, most especially. Just last week, there was 14 sets of guidance that was released from the Department for Education that school leaders needed to appraise themselves of, assimilate, and apply to their contexts, and to try to think, how can we extend our opening in a way that reassures our parents and carers, is reassuring to our staff, but also fits with our own staffing structure. I mean, of course, many teaching staff are shielding or have vulnerabilities that mean they can't attend work at school in person. And of course, many of our church school buildings are small Victorian buildings in villages that don't lend themselves particularly well to classes being divided up into bubbles of 15 children and spread around the school. So our head teachers have had an enormous task over the last 10 days, seeking to do the right thing, risk assessments, planning, talking with staff and governors, and reassuring parents and carers all at the same time. So many plates to spin, and constantly questioning whether they're doing the right thing in the right way. And so my role has mainly been about assuring heads that we've got their back and that we will support them in the decisions that they make, the difficult decisions that they have to make. They can't follow every bit of the guidance, but they can give their best endeavours to do that. I know it's controversial with unions and others concerned about schools' wider opening being too soon. But I believe that we should support schools to make the best decisions and begin to welcome children back into schools where we know that they can flourish and thrive, because that's what we believe our church schools do so well.
Well, thank you. That's a helpful sort of snapshot of something of the pressure that school leaders are under in particular at the moment. And once again, I mean, I have nothing but admiration. I think sometimes that I have a difficult job with decisions that we're having to make at the moment, but it feels like nothing compared with the sorts of decisions which have such far-reaching implications that our schools are having to make. Last year, the Church of England articulated a vision for Christian education. It was entitled Deeply Christian, Serving the Common Good. And it focused on 4 sort of key values, that of wisdom, hope, community, and dignity. I'm wondering what you feel those have to say to our schools at this particular time, how they can be a resource to our schools, and then perhaps more widely as well, how other Christians can be praying for our schools at this time.
Yeah, that's a really helpful question, and it's actually one of the communications I sent to school leaders was actually framed in those 4 aspects of the vision. And it was to encourage school leaders to think about, what does wisdom look like in this time? What does good decision making look like in this time? How can they make sure that they are surrounded by support in making decisions and not isolated? What does it mean when government guidance is flying into your inbox at a rate of knots? What does it mean to slow down, to help yourself make wise and good decisions? Hope's a kind of slippery thing, I think, and it can be too easily drawn down into just some kind of optimism, and I feel it's really important that our school leaders feel anchored in that Christian hope, that God is with us and with them in their daily thinking and planning, and that there is hope for their school community. We've just, several directors of education and myself, we've written a document which we've entitled Never the Same, and it's particularly to support schools as they're thinking about rebuilding after this crisis, through this crisis. And our school communities, like our wider communities, aren't ever going to be the same. And it's how we hold on to that reality, yet also the reality that we believe that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the community, I was drawn in this Easter season to the passage from Luke 24, where those followers of Jesus leaving Jerusalem to Emmaus, and and how shocked and traumatized they must have been walking away from seeing Jesus brutally killed, and how Jesus walked with them, and they didn't know him, and they didn't recognize him for who he was. But that sense that they traveled together and Jesus traveled with them. And I think there's much to say there to our schools about community. We don't travel alone through this. We travel with one another and with Jesus by our side. And the last one, dignity, that great respect and belief in the inherent value of each child as a child of God, known, named, and loved by him. And our school leaders are passionate about supporting children individually and as individuals. And I think it's really interesting. I read today something where someone said, we shouldn't assume that children will come back to school traumatized, and neither should we assume that they will come back to school entirely well. And I think our school leaders will be preparing for both of those responses and a range in between, respecting that each child is going to be affected by this crisis in different ways.
So those values, wisdom, hope, community, dignity, are going to be needed for a long time to come as well, I suspect. So thank you ever so much, Carolyn, for what you've shared today. And I hope any school teachers or school staff, indeed school governors and so on, who are watching this will be encouraged and know that the diocese is very much here to support you and praying for you. But it may be also for others watching today that actually, if you know someone who works in a local school, maybe now is a good time to just give them a quick phone call or write them a little note, just some way to offer some encouragement, to let them know that you're praying for them and that you appreciate the work that they are doing at this time and indeed in the weeks and months to come. So thank you all once again for all that you're doing to serve God's church and God's kingdom at this time.